you afterwards, and those who are on our waiting list and unable to join us will also get a recording. So we're good to go. My name is Caitlin Small. I'm the director of SEL here at Project Adventure. I'm joined by my coworker, Josie Martin, over here to my left. We're really excited that you joined us. This is a very quick webinar. We wanted to share some of our exciting ideas and thoughts with you about the experiential learning cycle for SEL. So this is going to be quick and snappy, share some ideas with you. We have a few opportunities to interact today as well. So you know there is a chat box. If you have any technical issues, go ahead and type into that chat box. You hover over the controls for the webinar, you should be able to see that chat option. That would be the best way to let us know that something's going on, and us or one of our coworkers will help to get to you and hopefully be able to solve any issues that you have today. I have everybody on mute, FYI. There's going to be a lot of folks in the room, so rather than have audio issues, we're going to keep it that way for now. But we will have some interactive options in a couple minutes, which I'll show you in just a few minutes. So we're going to just dive right in again. We don't have a whole lot of time today. So let me get into my slides. And I'm going to have to reshare my screen. Of course, there's always going to be some little glitches here. There we go. Okay. We figured it out. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking today about the ELC loop. The experiential learning cycle for SEL. A little bit about what to expect for our session today. There will be that little bit of interaction through something called mentee. I'll show you how to use that in just a moment. Be a good way for us to hear from you all. We're going to do a brief introduction to the experiential learning cycle. I imagine a number of you have been with Project Adventure for trainings before or in the adventure field. We're not going to get into the minutiae of that, but paint a big picture about how the ELC can be helpful and important to the SEL. We're going to talk about that alignment between ELC and SEL competencies and development and make that connection for those who haven't before. I'm really excited about it and really excited to be here at PA, so that's what we'll be talking about today. And by the end of today, we're going to suggest 3 approaches for using the ELC in your work. Absolutely collect your questions as we go, because we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So even though with this number of folks on the line, it'll be too hard for folks to chime in, we want to be able to answer your questions. So feel free to jot those down as we go, and we'll loop back at the very end and come back and get some of your input, your feedback, and your questions. I'm going to hand it to Josie here to introduce herself briefly, and then it'll come back to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Josie Martin. I'm a trainer and consultant here at Project Adventure, and I focus primarily on social emotional learning, helping develop our activities and programming, as well as training and working with youth. I came to Project Adventure through a pretty standard adventure and experiential pathway, starting back at summer camp in college and then working my way through some experiential and environmental education programs before joining the team here. And I'm really excited about my work here because it allows me to kind of join my passion for active and engaging learning with the ideals of creating opportunities for students to learn how to love education and to get the most out of their education and feel empowered in their own education.
Great. Thanks, Josie. In contrast to Josie, I do not come from the adventure field. I've been at Project Adventure for just under 4 months now, fairly new hire as the director of SEL, but I come from the social emotional learning world. Before I came to PA, I was at a place called the Pear Institute. We did research and training and coaching on SEL through Harvard Medical School. So I've been in the SEL field for a long time now, working in schools, supporting educators and doing SEL, measuring SEL, rolling it out school-wide. And that's what I bring to this conversation. So I don't have the experience as an adventure facilitator, but I have the experience of someone steeped in the SEL world. And I'm actually really excited about being here because I think there's so much parallel between the SEL world and what happens in experiential education through places like Project Adventure. That's going to actually fill a gap in the education field that people have been struggling with for a long time, which is namely, how do we do SEL? It's a big question, but we all know that we want to build these skills in our young people. We know the competencies. Most of us are familiar with Castle's framework and the various other frameworks that are out there. We get that we want our kids to have communication skills, collaboration skills. We want them to take leadership and have self-reflection and self-regulation and all that kind of stuff. But the question still remains, okay, how do I give that to them? And SEL by nature is relational and experiential. And by providing these opportunities through what we call the experiential learning cycle, we are giving them relational and experiential opportunities to build these new SEL skills. So regardless of what your role is, and we'll get back to that in just a second, I would love to hear what your role is. I hope that what we're going to be talking about today, this idea of experiential learning, really rings true for you in one way or another. A lot of what we're trying to present is how this can be used in a standard classroom, K-12 classroom. But regardless of whether you're an academic teacher, a PE teacher, a counselor, if you work in after school, whatever your role may be, I think that there would be some new ideas that can be sparked through this conversation. So that's where we're hoping to go. And yeah, just really excited to share what I have learned over the last 4 months of being here at Project Adventure and all the potential that I see in linking experiential learning with SEL. So that's where we're going. I would love to hear a little bit about who's here. So this is where we're going to do the interactive portion of our afternoon. I'm going to just pop out of this screen and switch over to this one. Okay, so this is a tool called Mentee, and I'm going to ask you all to play along with me. Hopefully you won't mind. You can use the browser on your computer or the browser on your cell phone. Either one works. And what you're going to do is go to the website you see at the top of the screen here, www.mentee.com. And it's going to prompt you for a code, and you'll put in this 6-digit number, 461114. And when you do that, this question will pop up. What, oh, you know what? Yes, I was right. Sorry, what is your role? And I would love you to type in the answer to that question, and we'll see what happens when we do that. I'm going to join, and we'll hop on mentee.com, and then you're going to put in that 461114 code. And then it'll say, what is your role? And it's filling in. You guys are doing it. Nice job. Okay. I'll put in mine. And as you see, we're going to create a Wordle together, or a word cloud. We get to see who's in the room. 6th grade teacher, school counselor, Project Adventure teacher. Awesome. We get to see, ooh, the Spark. That's an amazing role. I don't know what that means, but I want to do it. Camp director. Excellent. Should also be really relevant here. Health teacher. EL program coordinator. Excellent. You can probably teach me plenty about the experiential learning cycle. Lots of good stuff here. Fabulous. Health teacher. Love it. A lot of health and PE teachers. That's awesome. You guys are such forerunners in this field. I'm hoping that we can help you be spokespersons for experiential learning in your school. Hopefully some of this can help you message to the rest of the folks in your school why what you're doing is so important and so powerful. So very cool. Thank you. All right. I'm going to do something now. Keep entering your role if you haven't had a chance to yet. It's going to keep populating and adding to this, but I'm going to go to the next question. And if you look on your browser or your phone, it's going to ask you to go to the next slide or next question. Where do you work? I would love to hear the actual location. I'm in Beverly, Massachusetts right now, so you can say that. Or you can say the school or the organization you work with, or you can do both. And this one is going to be a little bit different. Instead of a cloud, it's going to look a little bit different. We have someone from Syracuse, Jersey, Metro West YMCA, yeah, Metro West, that's where I grew up. Army and Academy, Birmingham, Michigan, love it. Oh, it's like someone from Project Adventures here, but that's Josie. Me too. Hopkinton, I used to play soccer in Hopkinton. Excellent. It's going to keep scrolling as this populates. Someone from Denver. Oh, Newtown, Connecticut, I bet that's Sarah. Hi, Sarah. New Jersey, excellent. Waypoint.
Got our friends up at the Brown Center, it looks like.
Yeah, awesome. Action Inc. I know we're working with you guys. That's exciting. Fabulous. Good to hear from you all. I'm so excited that this is working. It's such an experiment. Okay. Keep entering that. Again, I want to see where you're from, where you work, where you live. We will be coming back. First of all, I'm going to record all of this, and you guys will get a copy of what everyone's answers are. But there's one additional question I'm going to leave up as we continue into our presentation, which is any questions you have. So on your Mentee page, on your phone or your browser, as questions come up for you as we're presenting, enter them in here. We'll come back to them at the end, and we'll be able to see any questions that you've recorded and try to answer as many as we can. So that will be up for you Continue to populate that. You won't see it on the screen here, but it's still there. So no worries, but that's a great place to record your questions as we go. Okay, great to hear from you all. I'm gonna have Josie kick this.
Yeah, we're gonna jump on in and we're gonna start with the basics, experiential learning cycle. Here it is. And we're gonna get into more depth as we go through the rest of this presentation. But just to kind of give folks who maybe aren't familiar with the experiential learning cycle, the overview of it, it's going to always start with that experience you see at the top of the screen, or experiencing it says. And then the cycle is really a reflection cycle of 3 stages. The observation stage, where you might be asking what happened, transitioning into like a generalizing stage, where so what is kind of the topic, why does what happened matter? And then the final stage of that reflection, applying. And you might be applying it back to that exact same learning experience as you continue through it, or you might be applying it to a new experience or location or setting. And that's the now what question. What are we taking with us from this experience that we're going to keep doing or not do in the future? And for some context here and at Project Adventure, using Adventure Education, a lot of folks think of our challenge course. And so an experience that's pretty common for the challenge course is, of course, the climbing and belaying aspect. Belaying being where you have a team on the ground or a person on the ground who's managing a rope system to keep you safely off the ground. And following that experience, students might be asked a question like, how did we communicate with each other today? And you might hear some pretty typical responses to this of we needed to speak individually, not everyone could talk at the same time, or perhaps we really needed to focus on listening so that we could hear the needs of different people in the group. And so following this observation cycle around, kind of getting into that generalizing, we might follow up with the question of why was it important to listen to other people when they're on the challenge course? And again, you might be able to imagine what some of the responses to this question are going to be. A big one focused on safety and making sure that people feel physically safe and are physically safe. But also possibly getting into making sure that people feel heard and being an important part of that group. And as we follow around that generalization, we might start shifting into applying that concept, back into the classroom and thinking, why is it important to listen to others when you're in classrooms working on a project? And some of those pieces of making sure that people feel heard and like they're a valued part of that group might come up in that transition. Followed up with, we've identified what's important here and why it's important. So how can we start practicing that in the classroom and naming those pieces so that when you transition back to the classroom and you're no longer on the challenge course, you've built that framework for your students of how to use this learning opportunity.
So that's one way to use the ELC and an adventurous experience like being on the challenge course. But it doesn't have to just live on this challenge course, right? The ELC can be used in the classroom setting for all different kinds of purposes. The idea is that we're creating a memorable, powerful experience where students are being asked to challenge themselves in some new way, interact or learn and interact with things in a new way. And then we use the cycle, the reflection piece, the rest of that cycle, to make meaning of what happened. Well, first to notice what happened, make meaning out of it, and really understand what was going on, and then apply that understanding to something else. So we can use this in the classroom, in a school, in a couple of different ways. One is content focused. We can create an experience where students are exploring a concept that you want them to learn. The experience itself could demonstrate that concept. Thinking, for instance, of in a physics classroom, there's a whole lot of this that happens. The experience of observing those simple machines and how they interact. But using that reflective cycle, we make meaning out of what has been observed and experienced, and are able to analyze what we observed, and then apply that either to the next step of this project or to another context outside of this project. Much more than memorization, this is understanding what's happening and then applying it. So the cycle can be used for academic content like that, but it also can be very process focused. It can teach kids the skills, the capacities of how to get from here to there, how to learn, how to be an active, engaged learner. So things like self-regulation, collaboration, communication skills, listening skills, healthy relationships, how you interact with the people around you. It can be used in the classroom and sometimes for both of these things at once. You can use the ELC around a physics project and have at the same time the content being the thing that's being reflected on and the experience, the interpersonal and the intrapersonal experience that can help kids to then make those observations of what's happening socially and emotionally in that classroom, understanding why that's happening, and applying that understanding to the next context. So we have some examples of what these things can look like for you today. The very first one is what folks may traditionally think of as a project adventure type activity, doing something in the classroom for SEL skill practice. So rather than content focused, this one really is more process focused, thinking much more about building those learning and engagement skills. And this is a way that can be brought into the classroom with activities, games, and group challenges to practice those skills that's going to be needed for academic work. So if you imagine, for instance, you have a big unit coming up where students are going to be working in groups, there's a whole lot of skills that they're going to need to use to work well in a group. And the ELC can be used with activities, games, and group challenges to prepare students to use those skills and give you, the educators, some tools and opportunities to reflect on those skills before they're being expected to use them. It helps us to connect, the ELC rather helps us to connect these activities, games, and group challenges to skills so that they're much more than activities, games, and group challenges. They are those opportunities to be practicing the skills that can then feed into the academic work. And a couple benefits of doing this in the classroom, even though it can feel like taking that break from academics and doing an activity, a game, or a challenge, it increases engagement and energy. If you're having trouble getting kids to connect with the learning, to, they're not feeling like they want to be there, or they're having a hard time being present with each other or with you, or engaging with the content, it's a great way just to raise the energy in the room. That laughter and the fun and the play is actually a really huge part of activating the parts of our brains that learn. So it's not irrelevant. And then it prepares students for those SEL skills that they need in the learning process. Let me give you an example. It's an activity called Blind Polygons. So, example, in small groups, you give students a loop of rope or string, right? Very low props. You could buy a ball of yarn. With everyone's hands on the rope, you're going to ask them to create a shape. It could be a triangle, a circle, etc. Everyone should try to make the same shape, though, in these groups of, say, 4 or 5 students together. Once they're kind of successful and they get a handle of that, now you're going to ask them to close their eyes. With their eyes closed now, they're going to try to make a shape with their team, with their hands on that rope. Once they think they succeeded, they can open their eyes and check. So you can probably imagine what might happen in an instance like this, right? You're going to have some students who, well, first of all, I imagine the noise level in your classroom is going to rise pretty quickly. When people feel like they're not being heard, they just talk louder, right? We all do that. And so that's going to happen. You're going to have some students who probably are trying to vocally direct others, some who are trying to physically direct others, some who aren't even thinking about others and they're just trying to do their own thing. Some might, be the type to become more passive in that situation, sit back and sort of watch and let others act. Others may get frustrated and let go and walk away, right? So a whole lot of things could be happening. Oh, and by the way, the positive could happen also. The group may really gel and get it and figure out a way to communicate with each other and feel around and figure out where they are so that they can actually create their shape. What's happening in this moment, though, is a whole lot of communication, collaboration, teamwork, leadership, engagement. And by using the ELC with an activity like this, we get to talk about what happened. It might be something like, okay, I noticed that when we felt like folks weren't listening to us, there was a whole, what did we notice about the noise level in the room? Talk about how a whole lot of shouting started to happen. Like, well, was that actually a helpful way for us to communicate? Was that effective with your team? Did that help you reach your goal faster? And based on what we've learned through this activity, how do we then want to communicate with each other once we get into this group project? And it also, in a way, gives you as an educator some sort of formative assessment for their teamwork abilities. You'll get a sense of which of these groups is really ready to dive in and work together, which has a natural leader, which has a quiet leader, and which ones are really struggling and are going to need some additional support. So this can come before your academic work as a way to prepare you and the students for whatever of those social emotional skills they're going to be required to use in their learning process.
And that's just one way in which we can use the experiential learning cycle in your classroom. You might also be thinking of some of those more traditional active learning, or you might even call them experiential learning avenues that you have in your school. And that could be anything from project-based learning, role plays, you can see the list here in front of us, places where students are engaged and active in some sort of project. And we've been discussing as we put this together the idea of that classic field trip to the little woods behind your school, or maybe that like wetland that's easily accessible. And how often we see those as kind of standalone projects or activities or experiences, and that by using the experiential learning cycle, you can really dig in and fully get a learning experience out of it instead of limiting that potential that's there. So take that idea of the wetland behind your school. It's probably the place that kids kind of know about, and you feel this sort of obligation to use it, perhaps in like a science curriculum. But it can be a really trying sort of situation of getting everybody ready to leave the classroom, of walking down there in a way that's appropriate, and then collecting some sort of samples, say, for that science program or project, and then getting everybody back to the classroom and kind of feeling that urge to rush through so that you can get those scientific results, and they can perhaps like build graphs or do some calculations around what they found down there. But by taking that moment to pause and integrate the experiential learning cycle, you can dive in and get so much more out of this experience. And it becomes for you perhaps less of a hassle of getting out there to make this curriculum piece work. And it becomes this opportunity to really highlight the social emotional development of your students and let them learn from that whole experience instead of just that science content. Which brings us to the next piece of the academic experience. And these are the really traditional pieces that you see in everyday classroom. It could be essay writing, test taking, homework, or even just that work in the classroom. And we're thinking that as students learn more and build their metacognition about their own learning process, the ELC can really support that and empower that process from happening. And I often think back to my own experiences in school when we started talking about how we can use the ELC every day. And I remember very specifically a history test that I took in 6th grade about ancient Egypt. And I remember it very vividly because when I got it back, I had 99%. And I was by no means an A student and not really even a B student. So this 99% really stuck out to me. And I remember just overwhelming kind of feeling of joy and like success in that moment. And I was excited about education, my education specifically. And then fast forward 6 weeks, we've gone through a whole nother lesson and we're wrapping up our ancient Greece lesson. And I'm getting ready for the next test. And I remember this specifically because it's the night before the test. And I'm thinking, what is it that I did last time that made me do so well on that first test? But it's now been 6 weeks. I haven't thought about what I did for the last test. I've maybe been focusing on this new topic, but maybe not. I don't really remember. And I have no idea what it is that I need to do to prepare for that test. And what I do remember is that I didn't do very well on it. I certainly didn't get back in that 99% sort of range. But if I think about how we could have used the experiential learning cycle in that moment, right after that first test, what a powerful tool that would have been for any 6th grader to repeat that success and develop and recognize those skills as they're building them. So just pausing in that moment of, oh, I did really well on this, and then asking that next obvious question of, what was it that you did that led to this success? Did you study the night before? Did you do all the readings as you were supposed to? Was there a particular aspect of this that really drew you in, perhaps like the artistic part of it or a literary part of it, and letting kids like find that connection that they have to their education? And then creating a goal or a plan for the next unit of, I know this worked and I know this didn't work, so here's what I'm going to try and do in this next unit to reach that kind of success in the future. Is one way that we can incorporate that experiential learning cycle into the everyday of the classroom. And whether it's a test or an essay, we can really use this in a broader sense. And I think too about how many standardized tests we're asking kids to take. It's in the hundreds. between kindergarten and 12th grade? And how often do we pause and say, oh, how are you doing? And how can we support you in this task, which it seems really arduous to you and overwhelming to you, perhaps, to help them build that sort of capacity?
We often think of the experience and experiential learning cycle being something big and grandiose. And I think that there's a ton of potential in that, right? Like creating opportunities like these where students are having this really embodied experience of learning is incredibly powerful. But plenty of times in our schools, we need to be learning in this sort of more traditional kind of way. And there's nothing wrong with that. By using the ELC, we can turn that into much more. And help those students really internalize the process skills, not just the product skills. And so we've talked a little bit about the different ways or different types of experiences that you can put into that phase of the cycle. And I want to focus now on the rest of that cycle, the reflection loop down the bottom there. Then what we often refer to this in shorthand is the what, so what, now what part of the cycle. Some of this may be familiar for you all, but just because it's familiar, I find, doesn't mean that it's easy. And it takes me plenty of time to formulate the right kind of questions to lead a student through this process. So, and there's an incredibly powerful alignment between this reflective loop and social emotional learning. So I'm going to walk us through this part of the reflective loop and then connect us back to social emotional learning and show you why this is so important and so powerful, and why every time you do the experiential learning cycle, it actually is social emotional learning, which to me is very exciting. So starting with that what piece, this is where we're asking our students to be detectives of their own experience, to look back on what just happened, whether it was that test, the project, or the climbing wall, and make observations. What happened? What did you notice? What happened first? What happened after that? What was successful and what wasn't? How do we assess that? And we're identifying correlations, saying like, okay, I noticed that when you combine those two substances, something happened. What happened? Tell me what you noticed. Tell me what you saw. This could happen on that content learning based level or the process based level, right? We could be asking them things about when you combine those two liquids, what happened? We could be asking them, you know, I noticed that you got frustrated in that project when you're trying to make that shape in blind polygon with your team. What did you notice about the people in the group? When you got frustrated, what happened? How did you react? How do you know that people were frustrated? What did that feel like for you? And what did you do when you started to get frustrated? This is, again, the detectives of their own experience, being able to name the what, the how, the when, and you as the facilitator can facilitate what they're focusing on also. And things that you notice that were important, you might want to call their attention to a certain moment, help them draw a correlation. But then at other times, they're going to notice things that you didn't see. And so there may be generative opportunities here too, where they're bringing up things that you didn't even know or notice yourself or realize would be important to them. Once we notice what happened, then we can guide them to make meaning out of what happened. We're trying to help them then make connections and understand why what happened is important. We're identifying significance of those things. Where was the important moment? What changed things for you? Or why is it important that that happened? And again, this can be content related or process related. So we can say things like, okay, you combine those two new liquids and starting to harden and they got warm. We noticed those things in our what phase. Okay, so what does that tell us is happening? What does that mean? Identifying the consequences. This can be very behavioral as well as very content focused, right? How do your teammates react when you started yelling? Did that help you get to your work faster? And then identifying those obstacles or the assistance. What helped in this project? What got you where you wanted to go? What got in your way? This is a really critical phase in these questions. I think we can often fall back on questions like, why was that important? And being able to vary those questions and understand what we're trying to probe for and what we're trying to connect and make this phase really powerful. And the third one, our now what phase, is taking the stuff that we noticed, the meaning that we made out of it, and that new understanding, and applying that to something else, planning for later. That could be within the same project. It could be, okay, you know what? We realized that screaming at each other is not effective. What do we want to try differently next time so that your group can be more effective together? It could be, you know, okay, now that we know that new mixture feels warm, and we know that means that it's exothermic. Here's me drawing back into my, thank you, Josie, affirmation. What is that? What do we need to know now? Okay, so we know that that's an exothermic mixture. How are we going to set up the right equipment for the next phase of this project? How's that going to help us move forward? Or it could be, okay, we've learned this in this setting. When else is this important in our lives? We could be reaching outside the classroom into personal lives, into the community, into other classes. For those who are PE teachers, I'm sure you do this quite a bit because the skills that students are learning doing adventure with you are incredibly important to every other part of their lives. So this is where we take the understanding that we've built in the first two phases and apply it to the next phase. So let me explain why I think this is so important. This is a little bit of a complicated graph, but I'll walk you through it. Okay? On the left-hand side, in the left, but very far left column, are our three phases of that reflection part of the experiential learning cycle. Experience has taken place, and now we're going through what, so what, and now what. And that second column is sort of breaking down what we mean by those things. Across the top, we have the CASEL competencies. I'm going to focus particularly on these first four here. Self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and then responsible decision-making. You'll notice in that first phase, in the what phase, is where we're really focusing on that awareness piece. By asking these what questions and making those observations, we're asking students to pause in their process and their learning and all their activity and say, what do you notice about yourself? And what do you notice about what's going on around you? We're asking them to assess and identify those correlations, both personally and socially. Huge opportunity to build that awareness piece of the social and emotional landscape. In the second phase, as we move into the so what, as we're identifying significance, identifying the consequences of what we did and what we tried, and obstacles or assistance, we're still doing some self-awareness and social awareness, right? I'm still noticing, okay, when I got frustrated, this is what I did, right? Understanding that piece. And when I did this, this is how it affected other people. We're also starting to shift then in this phase into self-management and responsibility. Starting to acknowledge what the impact of my actions was, or understand how I feel when certain activities happen and how I can communicate that to other people, for instance, right? And then that third phase, and the now what phase, is where we're starting to move into action, hypothesizing, making that plan, and connecting to other contexts. And that's where we're really solidly in self-management, responsible decision-making. Self-management is not possible without self-awareness. Responsible decision-making is not possible without social awareness. And one of the most important parts of the ELC is that it's helping us close this loop. So often, I think what we do as adults, it's supernatural, is to say, you know what, I noticed that you were screaming at Josie over there. What are you going to do next time, right? There's a big leap there. From, yeah, I was screaming at Josie, she was really annoying, right? To, well, probably next time I'm still going to scream at Josie because she's still annoying. You're not annoying, Josie. Without that middle phase, that so what phase, we're skipping over this huge piece where we talk about, okay, that's what happened. What matters about that? How does that impact other people? How does that impact you? How does that impact your life and your ability to reach your goals? And that middle phase becomes a way to close that loop between what's going on and that awareness piece and the action piece of managing myself and my decisions and how I go about things in the world. So that is how we build social emotional skills. Without going through that whole process, though, we're not making those connections of why any of this matters. And whenever we pause to talk about why it matters and what the effects are, that's when we're helping students build those new neural connections where they're putting, concepts together, build those new neural pathways and understand new ways that they, to really take control of their own selves, their own ways of interacting, their social and emotional lives. Not to leave out the most important piece of all, which is those relationship skills. Those are present throughout when we do experiential learning because by nature it's interactive. And we have an opportunity throughout to be building those relationships. So not to leave them out, it's a really steady, constant thread throughout this whole thing. So I think that this is sort of the so what of our presentation here. Saying experiential learning is a great way to engage learners and help learning, but it also, every time you do it, is helping students to move through this cycle. To actually not just ask them to take on new behaviors because you think they should, but help them to create internally their own motivation, their own intrinsic motivation, their own understanding of what's possible if they try something new, and then help them to practice that stuff. So we're going to go back to mentee for one more moment. So I'm going to hop out of here. I see we will come back to the questions, so I'm not leaving them behind entirely. But I do want to ask this one, which is, how have you used experiential learning? Given that we gave a few different examples, I'd love to hear from you all. What are some ways that you use it? It could be in tier 2 counseling groups. It could be that you're using experiential learning in your summer camp in some pretty fascinating ways. So again, if you go back into the mentee page, it should be the next question for you. This one might take a little longer for you to type out, so I'll just keep talking for a minute and fill the silence. This is how we do everything around here in Project Adventure, and how we engage groups in their own development, their own growth, how we do leadership development. If you look back, and then this is actually entirely accidental, if you look back in our presentation, we realized that we were doing a bit of a what, so what, now what cycle within this presentation as well. So we'd love to hear some ideas from you all in ways that this is popping up in your work. So as we're populating that, I am going to go back to our presentation and just have Josie talk to us a little bit about some possible next steps.
Yeah, so we're moving into our now what phase of our presentation here. And something we wanted to leave folks with, especially maybe those of you who are newer to the experiential learning cycle or realizing that maybe you could come back in and focus on that so what stage a little bit more, is some like very clear kind of action steps. And the place that we want to recommend starting with is start with an activity where it's really confined, it's very clear what the objective is, and you can plan out ahead of time what those questions might be around what, so what, and now what. And it could be an activity like the blind polygon that Caitlin talked about at the beginning of this presentation, and find a time where that is relevant to what's going on in your classroom and do an activity like that with your students. It's kind of step one. And then for your own benefit, go through that process of what happened when I did this activity and dig into that. So what, like, why is it important that this happened? Maybe it's that perspective of, oh, this group is going to work really well together and this group is going to need a lot of support from me. Or maybe it's going to inform what your groups are going to look like later. Some people really stood out as leaders and you'd like to spread them out throughout the classroom. And finally, back to that now what. So you did this one activity in your class. What's the next step? Maybe it's just doing another activity in your class and getting used to this cycle in those confined sort of spaces. Or you could follow these dotted lines that we've drawn here on this slide. And there are two options of the next step. And it depends a little bit on what you're comfortable with and what makes the most sense in your setting. You could follow the fork to the top of the screen there where we have our little chip juggling things. And that's our traditional classroom setting. What's something that you're really used to teaching and you would like to change up and really get kids to learn more from, that you think you could start applying the experiential learning cycle to? It could be an English lesson, it could be a math lesson, any of those sorts of things you can apply the experiential learning cycle to. If that seems a little bit too much of a transition for you right away, then take that fork to the bottom of the screen where we have those interactive little chips down there. And this is to represent that experiential activity that's already happening in your school setting, whether it's student council or mock government or some sort of field trip that you do already. And capitalizing on that, after that project is over or that experience is over, or as it's ending, start initiating this experiential learning cycle and think about how you're reflecting with your students and working through those three stages to connect it back to your classroom and back to their overall learning experience. And these two places you can shift in between, depending on what you chose to go to next. You can then swap over to the other one, but build your capacity slowly so that it's natural and you're learning from it as you go.
It becomes a mindset over time. And almost reflexive, right? I notice that the facilitators here who've been doing this much longer than I've been around, it's almost a conversation style going through the process.
And I think you'll notice once you have it down that it might even become a conversation with your students of they have a question about something and you start to kind of naturally flow into that. Well, what did you notice? and helping kind of probe them through their own learning.
So we're nearing the end of our time together. I'm going to switch back to the mentee in just a minute and take a look at some of your responses and then do a little bit of Q&A. But before I do that, just in case we're going to lose some folks right at 4:15, I wanted to just let you know a couple of opportunities where you can learn some more. We have workshops here at Project Adventure all the time. The two I would recommend, if this is really interesting to you, is SEL Through Adventure, which is led by this lady right over here, Josie, and Adventure in the Classroom by our coworker, Larry Childs. They're back-to-back. So if anybody's doing graduate work or anything like that, it's a good opportunity to get two right next to each other. But we have lots more options for workshops and brand new ones coming up this year in 2020 that have never been held before. So check out that link for some information about that. You can email me directly at that email address there if you want to talk about how to customize some of this work for your school or your organization. If your school uses advisory, we have an advisory curriculum and program called Project Empower that's all about merging SEL and the ELC for advisory. So you're welcome to also email me about that if you're curious. And there's plenty of reading out there, and if you want to try to institute some of these activities in your classroom, there's a number of publications that would be helpful for you. You see a couple of them, one through pa.org, our website. Click on store and you'll get to a whole bunch of different publications. And then just a little shout out to one of our coworkers who I believe might even be on this webinar right now. Tara Flupo wrote together a great publication called Social and Emotional Learning in Action with a whole set of wonderful lesson plans for these kinds of activities, which you could really adopt in your classroom very easily. So those are some recommendations for where to go next. But let me head back to our webinar. This doesn't seem to be loading for me, unless none of you are listening anymore. If you all are left, I'll reload it just in case. Maybe that's the issue. Or maybe no one's using it yet. Maybe this is all brand new. That's all right. Let's go back to our Q&A and we'll wrap up with some of these here. Please feel free to continually enter your questions as they're popping up. I'm glad that you like the grid, Jeff. We'll definitely be sending the slides out to you all, as well as any responses to these mentee questions. We'll download the PDF and send that to you, and a link to the recording. So if you'd like to share the recording of this with any of your coworkers, that will definitely be an option as well. No, I'm not actually seeing any additional questions. Oh, here we go. We got some responses. Oh, it kicked you out, but it's working now. Okay, good to know. Thank you for putting that in, whoever did. So if anyone wants to try again, mentee.com, the code is the same. And you can skip forward to the slide that I'm on. We would really love to hear from you. It's fascinating for me, and I think for others on this webinar, to be able to hear how others in the field are using this model. But I guess we will, please continue to enter this, and I'm going to go back to the Q&A in case anything else pops up. Ooh, we might have another question. What's a good tool to measure growth in SEL in our students? Ooh, do I have a response for you? As I mentioned before I came to Project Adventure, I worked at a place called the PAIR Institute. They have a tool called the Holistic Student Assessment, or the HSA. If your students, it's a self-report tool for grades 3 and up, and there was a teacher report version for K to 3. And it can be used in a pre-post kind of method. I've used it as an educator myself before I worked for the PAIR Institute. Really loved it. Thought it gave amazing insight, both in a formative way and an assessment kind of way, right? It gives you amazing insight into what's going on for your people. If you're interested in using it, you can go directly to them, thepairinstitute.org, or you can talk to us because we also are working with them, and we're able to sort of help you access that assessment and use it in conjunction with anything that you're doing, really. We can help you do that, but particularly if you're doing adventure or experiential ed, we'd be happy to link you with that. So we utilize the program model in our after-school program. That's excellent. My roots are in after school. I came from the OST world, and I think there's so much potential there for helping young people develop in really powerful ways. So it's really exciting to me when we're able to make that crossover between school and after school. Fantastic. Well, in our very last minute, I'll just say a quick thank you to everybody for joining us. It's been a great time. Thanks for letting me experiment with this mentee thing. I think it's kind of cool. Anything from you, Josie?
No, thank you all for being here.
Yeah. Oh, before you go, that last thing, any feedback you have. here's a link. We would love, I'm also going to put it into our chat box. Let's see if I can do it and talk at the same time, kind of. Okay. Didn't show up the link. Okay. If you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on today, we would love that. You're also welcome to use Mentee and type some stuff in there if you don't mind it being public. But if you'd like it to be private, that's a good link for us to get a little bit of feedback from you. Yeah, I guess that's it. Exactly 45 minutes. Hope it was useful for you all, and we hope to hear from you.
Thanks for being here,
everybody.